Hej och välkomna till Ntd Nyheter. Jag heter Cecilia Samuelsson. Här är våra rubriker. Hur skall Israel agera på lång sikt för att förhindra och avskräcka från framtida attacker mot sina medborgare? Vi får en analys. Hamas handlingar värre än nazisterna enligt en rabbin. Och kommer Hamas att hållas ansvarigt? Judiska danskar från andra världskriget minns flykten till Sverige. Mästerverk från 1600-talet är nu återfunnen efter att ha varit försvunnet i hundratals år. Hur skall Israel agera på lång sikt för att förhindra och avskräcka från framtida attacker mot sina medborgare? Och hur kan USA bli inblandat? Ntd's Tiffany Meyer talade med chefredaktören från Newsweek för att få hans analys.
Josh Hammer, thank you so much for joining us. Good to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Josh, we're seeing reports compare what's unfolding in Israel to 9/11 in the States as in the worst intelligence failure of the time. Now, 9/11 launched the U.S. into the 20-year war in Afghanistan. What do you see in terms of Israel following this attack?
Well, look, let me first start by saying that what happened this weekend is unbearable. It is unspeakable. My fiance is Israeli. She was born there. Virtually all of her family still lives there. One of her brothers lives about 5 miles from Gaza. I mean, I cannot possibly explain to people what this feels like to have gone through this weekend during Shabbat, the Jewish Sabbath, the Jewish holy day, over a holiday as well, over Simchat Torah, a day that religious Jews do not even use their phones to let loved ones know that they are okay. And this was a truly unprecedented land, sea, and air invasion. Obviously, it is the Iranian regime, top to bottom, that was planning these attacks, that was coordinating these attacks with Hamas. We saw the Wall Street Journal later on Sunday confirm that is the case. Israeli intelligence hasn't quite confirmed that, but all it takes is a quick look at the sophistication of these joint land, sea, and air attacks. This is different in kind, not in degree, different in kind than anything Hamas has ever done since they took over the Gaza Strip back in 2007 after a bloody war with the Palestinian Authority. And Israel has no choice whatsoever to do what they should have done a very long time ago, which is a sustained operation in Gaza to get as many civilians out as possible, but stay in there for as long as needs to happen to demolish any and all infrastructure that even remotely smacks of jihadist infrastructure. What Hamas does is they put rocket launchers, they put all sorts of weapons, the terror tunnels, they put it in mosques, they put it in schools. They are known to use children and women and elderly as human shields under the international laws of war. Every single death of a civilian in that situation is at the feet of Hamas. Israel is going to have to essentially raze most of Gaza to the ground. That is what they are going to have to do. It is going to be ugly. There are going to be terrible images here, but unfortunately, it is what has to be done in order for there to be any peace and stability in the region. And here's the key point: for there to be any kind of last and durable peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians themselves, Hamas has to go. Hamas is an absolute obstacle that you cannot possibly get around other than full eradication of all of their leaders, all of their members, and all of their infrastructure. They are no different than ISIS or any other group. So the fight is going to be in Gaza right now. Obviously, Hezbollah getting in from Lebanon could dramatically complicate the picture. We have a hostage crisis right now. I expect Mossad to start trying to take out the heads of Hamas in Doha. Qatar is where most of them live. I would expect some targeted assassinations inside Qatar. Certainly some targeted assassinations, if not more so, inside Iran itself, inside Tehran. But for now, even holding aside the intelligence failure, which we're going to have to assess as well, the Israelis are going to have to get to the bottom of that. Right now, the focus is on securing the Israeli homeland, reestablishing control over the borders, operational control, and then raising Gaza to the ground while protecting as much civilian life as possible.
And Josh, to your point, Hamas is designated a terror organization by the U.S. and UN. How significant is the timing of this attack, almost 50 years to the day since the Yom Kippur War?
The timing of this attack, from my perspective, is twofold. One is it is, as you just said, almost 50 years to the day since the Yom Kippur War. So clearly the timing was intended to coincide with that. The last time the much vaunted Israeli security and intelligence apparatus failed as much as it did this weekend was 50 years ago in the Yom Kippur War. The other element here of the timing that I think you have to understand here, and I kind of glommed onto this immediately. I saw Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas has been saying the same thing. I think this is absolutely right. Is what is going on here is the Iranian regime, using Hamas as a convenient conduit, is trying to blow up the peace deal that has been emerging in recent months and was set to come along between Israel and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, which is the most important Arab country in the Sunni Arab world for any number of reasons. They are the custodians of the holy sites in Mecca and Medina. They carry a lot of sway. We saw the interview with Mohammed bin Salman and Brett Baer over in Saudi Arabia recently. They got a lot of attention where he was very optimistic about the prospects of peace with Israel. Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu used a lot of his comments at the United Nations recently talking about this peace. Iran has no interest whatsoever in Israel further integrating into the Arab world and continuing the circle of peace that President Trump and Netanyahu helped usher in with the Abraham Accords in 2020 with the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan making peace with Israel. So that is the other element of the timing here is Iran is really, really trying to escalate a hot war and to drive a narrative such that the Saudis would feel too pressured and then would not be able to join the Abraham Accords and make peace with Israel.
And Josh, zooming in on that peace deal, how much of what we're seeing unfolding in Israel right now is due to perceived weakness of the U.S. on the global stage?
Well, unfortunately, all of these dots connect with each other. And to give one very concrete example of that, and you can very clearly see in these videos, in these images, in these clips, you can very clearly see Hamas jihadists wielding American rifles. Now, historically speaking, Palestinian Arabs would typically hold Russian-based AK platforms. Well, where are they getting those U.S. weapons from? Well, it clearly seems that they're getting those weapons likely from Afghanistan, from the botched U.S. withdrawal in Afghanistan. The Taliban obviously hoovered up all of the American weaponry, the American vehicles, the missiles, the small arms, the firearms, everything left behind. And it appears that the Taliban, which earlier today said that they are now threatening to actually join the fight on behalf of Hamas in this war, the Taliban seems to have now sent those guns to Gaza via the Iranian regime as an intermediary, via the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which is a terrorist organization as well. And then the IRGC in turn shipped them over to Gaza through Hamas. So it's a whole mess. All these terrible foreign policy blunders all connect with each other. I find it hard to believe that the Russians and perhaps the Chinese did not have some knowledge in advance here. Russia and Iran are close. Even the head of Hamas actually was Ismail Haniyeh. He was actually in Moscow within the past few months. He's obviously very close to the Iranian regime as well, but he was in Moscow. Now, the Russia situation is a little complicated because Israel and Russia also are known to get along just fine. If it's confirmed that Russia had knowledge here, then that would be a devastating blow to the Israeli-Russian relationship. But as of now, what we know is that this was an Iranian-based attack, simply using Hamas as a convenient conduit.
And given all that is unfolding there, what must the U.S. do now?
So the bulk of the fighting, obviously, is going to be Israel. The Israeli military is very powerful. They are going to do what needs to be done. Israel has never once asked, ever, in the entire history of Israel, for anyone to fight a war on their behalf. They've never asked for a single American soldier. So there's no need for that. However, the fact that there are American hostages among the hostages taken in Gaza, I think, does accentuate the need for extremely close intelligence, security, coordination, planning. I mean, the CIA and Mossad, I'm sure, are on the phone with each other 24/7 at this point, trying to figure out how to extract those hostages. But other than that, at the barest of bare minimums, the United States, the Biden administration, has to stop pathologically flirting with the world's #1 state sponsor of jihad, which is the Iranian regime. The Biden administration has been abysmal, of course, in this regard. They have been absolutely abominable, most recently by shipping off 5 Iranian prisoners who committed terrible crimes, along with $6 billion in ransom to Iran to free 6 Americans, that coming at a price of $1.2 billion per hostage. Many in the Obama-Biden foreign policy orbit are pathologically obsessed with the idea of re-entering the Iran nuclear deal, thus giving money and potentially, God forbid, nuclear weaponry to this fanatical Islamist genocidal regime in Tehran there. So the United States should basically be sanctioning the crap out of Iran, out of Hamas, putting the most stringent, strictest terror financing, money laundering laws known to mankind in place there. One other thing that I think the United States very much should do. The country of Qatar is a very thorny country here. Qatar is one of the wealthiest countries in the world. They might actually be the wealthiest country in the world per capita. They are known to try to kind of win over many in D.C. Sure enough, just last year, I think it was, or a year or two ago, the United States named Qatar a major non-NATO ally. The leaders of Hamas live in Doha, Qatar. So what the United States really should do is use its leverage, including the fact that there is a massive U.S. airbase, Al Udeid airbase inside Qatar. They should use their leverage to try to pressure Qatar into giving up the heads of Hamas, into basically giving them up to face their crimes against humanity. So that would be a very kind of a keen role for the United States to play that is way short of boots on the ground or anything smacking of that.
Josh Hammer, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Medan världen kämpar för att bearbeta Hamas-terroristernas brutala dödande av civila israeler uppstår frågan om Hamas kommer att hållas ansvarigt. För att diskutera möjliga svar på situationen i Israel talade vi med en rabbin som är ordförande för US Commission on International Religious Freedom.
Rabbi Abraham Cooper, thank you so much for joining us. Good to have you here.
Nice to be back.
Rabbi, the horrors of what's unfolding in Israel is being broadcasted around the world. Hamas is now threatening to execute hostages live on TV. That's in the case of unannounced Israeli strikes. Your center is calling for Hamas to be charged with crimes against humanity. Give us a sense of just how serious this is.
Well, our center carries the name of a man named Simon Wiesenthal. He was a victim of the Holocaust. He lost 89 members of his family, and he became the famous Nazi hunter and campaigner for justice. So the fact that we carry his name also means that when you see, I never thought I would say this, but when you see Nazi-like actions that in some ways are worse than the Nazis, because one of the great challenges in bringing Nazi war criminals to justice is the Nazis worked very hard to hide the facts of the emerging genocide, of the final solution. The Hamas terrorists are live streaming and broadcasting their crimes against humanity all over the world. And unfortunately now, in the days when Israeli soldiers have finally gotten back full control of the territory, they discover in one kibbutz alone the bodies of 40 babies. The decapitation of babies, and the rest I don't even want to describe, but you have mass murder, you have kidnapping, you have mass rape, and you have here the targeting of civilians, merciless mass murder. This is a very serious issue, and it is something that the international community has, both international law, international tradition, if you will, of the International Criminal Court, the United Nations. There's no shortage of judicial addresses where this can be dealt with. The real issue is will there be political will on the part of any nation in order to hold Hamas terrorism accountable? That's still a big question mark.
And expanding on that, we are seeing world leaders, including some members of Congress, cheering on Hamas. And as you mentioned, children are among the brutally murdered here. Why do you think that is? Give us a sense of what's at the heart of this.
Well, for one thing, Hamas has always been fighting an asymmetrical war. They know they can't defeat on their own, and even with Iranian help, in a straight military battle against Israel. But their founding charter actually is a genocidal one, and it even invokes the anti-Semitic protocols of the Elders of Zion in their founding document. So say one thing about this group from the beginning, they've said it, and now they've had an opportunity to kill more Jews in a single day, to murder more Jews than any time since the end of the Second World War. And I think because the Palestinian Authority is so thoroughly corrupt, and there are many young Palestinians who've grown up on a steady diet, really, of a war curriculum, even though they're in UNRWA schools and there are 60 donor nations paying for it. They've all been brainwashed and educated, A, to hate Israelis, B, to deny any legitimacy to their neighbors, even being in that land, and C, to embrace a culture of death. So in that sense, the people who are on the ground, those who embrace it, you can perhaps see some context. What is also completely shocking is how the goals of Hamas, no two-state solution, is to get rid of Israel, and the methods that the world has been shocked to see are now all justified in these statements released by student leaders at Harvard, by Students for Justice of Palestine in various elite universities across the United States. And what I've been saying actually for the last few days is we're waiting for presidents of universities to finally start to push back and to basically say, hey, wait a second, you want to stand up for the future rights of your people, the Palestinians, to have their own homeland. If that includes genocide along the way, you'll have to excuse the rest of us if we no longer embrace what it is you're bringing to the table. They're not hearing it from the university elite, quite the contrary. We're not hearing an outpouring from corporate America, although, very interestingly, Major League Baseball now and the NBA, I think Jamie Dimon, a few others, have expressed solidarity with what just happened, this horrific series of massacres. But overall, we still see a gnawing silence. I wouldn't say so much an indifference, but I think a lack of courage on the part of the captains of industry and the people who are supposed to be educating our young people, a failure to draw the line in the sand. And the more you give, in terms of rhetoric, a free pass and justify everything that's said in the name of freedom of speech, the more we're going to see anti-Semitism increase, intimidation of Jews on campus increase, the demonization of Israel, etc. This is a very, very dangerous time, but it's also a moment of opportunity for people to take a deep breath and say, hey, wait a second, when did you sign us up for genocide?
And Rabbi, speaking of the U.S., Americans are also among the dead. The U.S. is sending an aircraft carrier group to that area. Israel has always fought its own wars. But in what ways can the U.S. help Israel?
Well, I think there are two ways. Number one, they're going to need certain kinds of munitions. They're going to need help to make sure they have enough interceptor missiles for the Iron Dome. But more importantly is for the United States to send a signal to Tehran, because the murders here and the hatred is all being expressed by Hamas, but those who did the training and paid the bill are all in Tehran. And so a message has to go out to the Iranians. If you dare cross the line and flip the switch for your other lackeys, Hezbollah, in Lebanon, where they have 150,000 missiles targeting Israel, and many of them with GPS. If that starts, then the United States will probably have to intervene directly. And that means not only to save Israel, but you have the entire Gulf region that would be under the thumb of the Iranians. That could lead to a much wider configuration. And that's something that certainly the United States doesn't want, Israel doesn't want, Saudi doesn't want, but the Ayatollah Khamenei may want it. And the only way he would be stopped is if he saw the calculus and said, no, I can't take on the little devil, Israel, and the big devil, the United States, at the same time. And maybe he'll take a step back from the brink. But it depends really, first, how President Biden puts forward the U.S. Approach, which means full support for Israel, which means a commitment to get out all of the hostages. There are Thai hostages, Italian. It's I think 15 different countries, but certainly making sure that the American hostages, if possible, be brought out safely. condemning Hamas and sending a signal to the Gulf neighbors that this time we have your back. Whatever we did with the Iranians in terms of releasing $13 billion and loosening sanctions, snapping back those sanctions, adding the Ayatollah Khomeini to the sanction list. There's a lot that the President of the United States and the United States Congress can do, both symbolic and practically. But right now, this is one of the most dangerous moments, I think, in the 21st century.
Rabbi Abraham Cooper, thank you so much for your time.
Den 8 oktober är en viktig årsdag för judar i Danmark. För 80 år sedan evakuerades över 7000 personer till Sverige under förintelsen. Tack vare denna insats kunde de undkomma deportation till nazisternas koncentrationsläger. Här kommer mer om detta historiska ögonblick.
Chefen för det dansk-judiska museet säger att det är viktigt att minnas andra världskriget och förintelsen, särskilt med tanke på den ökande antisemitismen.
We are living at a time where there's war, streams of refugees and persecution, and on top of that also a growing anti-Semitism, not only in Europe but also in Denmark. So that's why it's so important to keep this history alive.
92-åriga Ola Philipsson läser i sin barndomsdagbok och förflyttas 80 år tillbaka i tiden när han och hans familj tvingades fly från Danmark till Sverige. De var tvungna att göra resan för att undvika att deporteras till ett nazistiskt koncentrationsläger.
The friends of his who helped us were normal Danish citizens. They were not members of any networks. They were very anti-Nazi. But all this was like improvised.
I oktober 1943 beordrade nazisterna deportation av alla judar som bodde i det ockuperade Danmark. Men en tysk tjänsteman tipsade danska lagstiftare som sedan varnade judiska ledare.
They called their friends and said, "Hey, we've got a help here. Yes, I will come to my house." It was, as far as I know, an improvised network.
Philipsson blev en av över 7000 judar som flydde till det neutrala Sverige genom att segla i skydd av mörkret. Resan tog 2 timmar eftersom man försökte undvika nazistiska patruller.
A Swedish uniformed lady, and she said, "Välkommen till Sverige. Vill du ha ett stycke choklad? Welcome to Sweden. Do you want a piece of chocolate?" This to me is the biggest thing in my life.
Philipsson och hans familj återvände till Danmark efter kriget. Han säger att det nu är hans plikt att dela med sig av sin historia.
Ett sällsynt mästerverk har återupptäckts i kung Charles III samling i Storbritannien efter att ha varit försvunnet i hundratals år. Konservatorer har nu ägnat 5 år åt att restaurera verket av en av 1600-talets mest berömda kvinnliga målare.
Ett förlorat mästerverk återfunnet. Detta är Susanna Ende Elders av Artemisia Gentileschi. Målningen ingick i samlingen hos Charles den förste, den engelske monark som förespråkade denna kvinnliga italienska 1600-talskonstnär.
It's recorded in a number of different inventories since that time, but during the 18th century at some point it lost its attribution to Artemisia Gentileschi. It was also heavily discolored by historic conservation treatments and discolored varnish.
Det var först när intendenterna forskade i Charles den förstes samling och läste referenser till målningen i historiska dokument som de insåg att de hade något speciellt på gång. Den nyupptäckta målningen sitter bredvid ett självporträtt av konstnären.
Artemisia Gentileschi was one of the most important artists of the 17th century, and what made her so unusual is that she was a woman working in a very male-dominated artistic world.
Historien bakom målningen är hämtad från Bibeln. 2 äldre män spionerar på en ung kvinna vid namn Susanna när hon badar. De försöker locka henne till sex. När hon vägrar ställs hon inför rätta för äktenskapsbrott. Susanna fick till slut upprättelse.
The interesting link here is perhaps with Artemisia's own experience. She was raped at the age of 17 by another artist working in her father's studio, and she was also put in the witness box and tortured to prove that she was telling the truth, that she was actually raped. So it seems to have held a particular relevance to Artemisia.
Konservatorer har ägnat de senaste 5 åren åt att återställa målningen till dess forna glans. Det avlägsnade århundraden av smuts på ytan, gammal fernissa och färglager som inte var original. Det fanns också skador att reparera.
It was almost impossible to see the original paint. It was so covered in very yellow, obscuring varnish, and you could see that there was an awful lot of overpaint.
Det gjordes också några viktiga upptäckter under restaureringen.
One of the most important moments was when the historic lining, so a backing canvas that had been applied to the back of the picture, was removed as part of this conservation treatment, and it revealed the CR brand, the Charles I brand that marked it out as being in his collection.
Målningen hänger nu i gallerierna på Windsor Castle.
Tack för att du har tittat och på återseende.